Welcome. Today we're talking about one of the most bizarre of historical episodes. What is more, it didn't just happen once long ago. It has happened many times since. Today, we're talking about blood libel. At the most basic level, blood libel claims that Judaism practices human sacrifice and that the victims are children, usually baptized Christian children, but as the centuries passed, it was alleged that Muslim children could suffer the same fate. It's a claim that was first made in mid-12th century England. Initially, it was slow to catch on, but within a few decades, it was used to justify burning at the stake, the seizure of goods and property, and, beginning in the late 13th century, expulsion from England and later France. Blood libel became a recurring episode in Christian societies, reaching all the way through the Holocaust of the 20th century. Today, we'll unpack the first known accusation of blood libel and then sketch its later history. The first known blood libel identified an English boy, William of Norwich, as the victim. Our knowledge of William is really rather slight. It comes primarily from the life and passion of William of Norwich, which was written by Thomas of Monmouth, a 12th century monk. The title of the work tells us that we aren't dealing with strict history, at least not in the modern sense of the term. Rather, we're dealing with hagiography. Hagiography literally translates as holy writing. It is often used to denote the writing of saints' lives. The fundamental goal of any hagiographical work is religious edification. However, Thomas emphasized that his work was not a work of fiction, but one that reported true events. He even urged skeptical readers to investigate the matter for themselves. He writes, "Let it not be vexatious for you to investigate what was not vexatious for Christ to demonstrate. He who, while glorifying his saints, encourages us with their glorious examples." And in this quote, we see two things: an emphasis upon honesty and an emphasis on piety. This twofold combination, both a kind of academic transparency and an equal concern for Christian edification, defined hagiography as a literary genre. In Thomas of Monmouth's work, William of Norwich's own story, his biography, if you will, is really rather brief. Thomas tells us that William was born on Candlemas, that is, the feast day when Christians commemorate Jesus being presented as a newborn in the Temple of Jerusalem. William was devout and virtuous throughout his childhood, but his hard work ethic caused the local Jewish population to try and exploit him by paying him a wage lower than he deserved. It was an old medieval Christian stereotype that Jews paid badly, and when this was brought to William's attention and they were exposed, they decided to kill the boy, and not just kill him, but do so as part of the religious celebration of Passover. So, young William's betrayal takes on aspects of the story of Jesus' own crucifixion. Thus, the person who kidnapped William is paid in silver, just as Judas in the New Testament was when he promised to betray Jesus. And just as Jesus was killed during Passover, so too was young William. But in fact, it's unclear where Thomas of Monmouth got his details, including various speeches that he attributes to the Jewish antagonists in his story. For example, after William is kidnapped, Thomas has a group of Jews say, "Just as we have condemned Christ to a most shameful death, so we condemn a Christian, so that we punish both the Lord and his servant in the punishment of reproach. That which they ascribe to us, we will inflict on them." It may be that such speeches were intended as just a narrative technique rather than as something literal. But two things here are worth noting. First, it shows Jews taking responsibility for crucifying Jesus. This was a common Christian accusation, not least in the medieval era, but, in fact, crucifixion was done by the Romans, not the Jews. Second, When the group of Jews says, "That which they ascribe to us, we will inflict on them," this indicates that conflict already existed between the local Jewish and Christian populations. In England, at least, Jews were a new immigrant community. They had fled to England due to violence that they experienced from Christians, especially in Germany during the Second Crusade. So, these tensions may not have originated in religious or ethnic difference. Nonetheless, it is clear that conflict was already present. According to Thomas, William was killed and prophetically buried by the Jews in secret on Good Friday. The accusation against local Jews did not begin immediately, but once it was made, we know that the local sheriff investigated the crime. But his conclusion was that no evidence indicated involvement by anyone in the local Jewish community. And this actually points to what became a common trend in later accusations of blood libel, a consistent lack of evidence that Jews targeted children. But at this point, we have to note a discrepancy. Thomas of Monmouth's work contains 7 books, or, as we might call them, chapters. But only the first discusses William and the allegations over his death. Once you get to book 2, a very different focus moves front and center. Miracles, specifically miracles of healing. Here it needs to be emphasized that until the advent of modern medicine, no miracle was more popular or more important than healing. It was the primary reason that people visited the tombs of saints and why they went on pilgrimage. In fact, more than 75% of Thomas of Monmouth's work is about these miracles. And this raises a question, although it probably can't be fully answered. At what point was Thomas of Monmouth motivated by something other than Christian piety? Popular sites of pilgrimage were popular sites of tourism, and therefore they brought in lots of money. And Thomas of Monmouth was part of a larger group of monks that ran the shrine dedicated to William of Norwich. Today, we might associate Protestant Christianity with skepticism about pilgrimage to saints' tombs, but in fact, there was often skepticism in medieval Catholic Europe too. Thomas of Monmouth's work reads a lot like miracle advertising, and thus, as a bid both for popularity and for influence in his own day. Of course, this is only a possibility, but the mixture of pious motives with base opportunism is very much a part of human existence. We shouldn't discount this possibility when reading Thomas's story. To summarize, Thomas of Monmouth alleged that the local Jewish population conspired together to murder a Christian child as part of the Jewish celebration of Passover, and that they did so intending to emulate the betrayal and eventual crucifixion of Jesus. Undeterred by a lack of evidence to substantiate his claim, Thomas made William's death and speculations about it the historical point of origin for a book that was primarily dedicated to miracle stories at a local site of pilgrimage that he and his fellow monks oversaw. And if this is all that happened, Thomas of Monmouth and William of Norwich would probably be forgotten by later history. But that isn't what happened. Instead, the allegation of blood libel leapt the English Channel, first entering France, and then the other kingdoms of Latin-speaking Christian Europe. In 1170, in the Kingdom of France, a new and horrific turn took place in the blood libel legend. In the city of Blois, the local Jewish population was accused of murdering a Christian boy, but this time, the local count oversaw the burning of 30 Jews as punishment for the alleged crime. What is more, the count took their property and wealth, which he then used to pay off debts that he had incurred borrowing from the same local Jewish population. In time, the blood libel legend further grew to include allegations of cannibalism, specifically the Jewish use of the Christian child's blood in the Passover meal. And this combination of accusation, violent retribution, and theft defined blood libel for centuries to come. Before continuing, we should note one thing. Part of what is odd about blood libel is that it has a strange parallel in accusations from ancient Rome, but these accusations were directed against Christians. According to Roman critics of Christianity, Christians were really cannibals. When they celebrated communion, they took a living baby, rolled it in flour, and then tore it limb from limb as they consumed it, in its entirety. This accusation was made by those who saw Christians as a twofold threat, as both a political and a religious threat to the Roman Empire. As both rumor and libel, the allegation of cannibalism was one of several ways that opponents of Christianity sought to discredit the movement. Of course, this failed and Christianity grew. But this raises a question. Did the ancient Roman allegation of Christian cannibalism somehow inspire the later Christian allegation of blood libel against Jews? In truth, we don't know. But it's such a striking, if weird, parallel that it has to be noted, even if it can't be resolved. Now I want to leap ahead to the most well-studied of all blood libel cases. It occurred in 1475 in the city of Trento, which is now part of Italy, but at the time was an Italian city located within the Holy Roman Empire. In this tragic story, a young boy, Simon, was found dead in a canal behind the home of a Jewish family. Several days earlier, the father had reported the son missing, stating his fear that Simon may have wandered off and drowned. But due to the location of the body, the blood libel accusation rapidly spread, although we also know that at least some locals denied the validity of the blood libel accusation. It's clear that by the late 15th century, the blood libel in Blois, France, had established a well-known pattern. The Holy Roman Emperor rapidly became involved in the case, condemning any potential violence against the Jewish population and forbidding any theft of their goods and property. The Pope also became involved, issuing similar condemnations, threatening excommunication, and even alleging that the entire accusation was nothing more than a pretext for theft. But the Pope also did something else. He reissued an encyclical entitled Sicut Judaeis, that is, As for the Jews. This encyclical actually dates from the time of the First Crusade, which is the first time that a pope condemned mistreatment of Jews. Sicut Judaeis was reissued multiple times between the time of the First Crusade and the death of Simon of Trent. So, by 1475, a well-established pattern was playing out yet again. A Christian child died, the local Jewish population was blamed, some believed the blood libel accusation, but others did not, including the papacy and the ruler of the territory. Nonetheless, as in Blois, tragically some Jews were killed. Torture was used to extract confessions, and torture victims implicated other Jews for the crime. Today, the blood libel in Trent is seen as one of many instances of injustice in the pre-modern world. However, it was hardly the last time that blood libel ruined lives. So what? Blood libel has been a recurring episode in not just medieval history, but in Christian history, and that of European societies more broadly. Consequently, it has lingered on in these same societies, even as Christianity has declined. And it has also entered other societies as well, most notably those of the modern-day Middle East. Some indication of blood libel's many afterlives can be seen in the very large literature that exists on the topic. You can easily find books on cases of blood libel in such times and places as late 19th century Russia, the early 20th century United States, and as you might have guessed, in 20th century Germany. Nazi publications frequently drew upon older accusations of blood libel, and yet, despite the defeat of the Nazis, blood libel accusations are still sometimes heard. But is that the proverbial another story for another day, or is it simply another chapter in a much older, if long discredited, mythology? If you're interested in learning more, these books are worth consulting. First, The Life and Passion of William of Norwich is now available in the Penguin Classic series, edited by Miri Rubin. For an up-to-date analysis of the case surrounding William, as well as the early afterlife of his alleged murder, read E.M. Rose, The Murder of William of Norwich, The Origins of the Blood Libel in Medieval Europe. It's an award-winning book and will likely shape the study of blood libel for some time to come. Finally is Magna Teeter's award-winning study, Blood Libel, on the trail of an anti-Semitic myth. It's a big book that primarily focuses on the death of Simon of Trent and its aftermath, until accusations of blood libel began to decline, at least in Western Europe, in the later 17th century. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.